When people talk about the roots of economic thinking, the same names usually come up. Karl Marx, Adam Smith, maybe Aristotle if someone really wants to stretch back. But there's a whole chapter of financial history most people never hear about. A chapter written nearly 1,000 years ago, long before stock exchanges, central banks, or capitalism as we know it. And in that chapter, a Muslim scholar issued a warning that still feels uncomfortably accurate today. His message was simple but dangerous. When money loses its moral anchor, societies don't just struggle, they rot from the inside. This is the story of Al-Ghazali, one of the most influential thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age. And to understand why his ideas still matter, you have to step into his world first. Picture the early 11th century. Europe is fractured, poor, and still climbing out of the shadows of the early Middle Ages. But beyond Europe's borders, another world is thriving. The Islamic world stretches from Al-Andalus in Spain across North Africa, through the Middle East, and deep into Persia. Its cities are crowded, wealthy, and sophisticated. Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus. These aren't just cultural centers, they're financial powerhouses. Trade routes pulse with life. Caravans carry silk, spices, textiles, gold, and silver across continents. Markets buzz with activity. Scholars debate philosophy, medicine, astronomy, law. Wealth is flowing, and society is changing fast. Too fast. Because alongside this explosion of commerce comes something else. Inequality, speculation, and a growing obsession with money itself. And that's where Al-Ghazali enters the picture. Born in 1058 in Persia, Al-Ghazali rose quickly through the intellectual ranks. By his mid-30s, he held one of the most prestigious teaching positions in the Islamic world. He was a philosopher, a jurist, a theologian, and a social critic all rolled into one. But what made him stand out wasn't his resume. It was his discomfort. While many celebrated the prosperity around them, Al-Ghazali sensed something deeply wrong. Society looked successful on the surface, yet hollow underneath. Wealth was increasing, but meaning was disappearing. So he asked a question that still feels uncomfortably modern. What happens when a civilization gets rich faster than it gets wise? To answer that, Al-Ghazali did something unexpected. He focused on money itself. This is where most Western audiences are surprised. Al-Ghazali wasn't just talking about faith or theology. He was one of the earliest thinkers to analyze money as a moral and social system. Where later economists would reduce money to equations and models, Al-Ghazali examined how money reshapes human behavior, how it alters incentives, how it affects trust, and how, if left unchecked, it can quietly destabilize an entire civilization. At the core of his thinking was a deceptively simple idea. Money is not meant to be worshipped. It's a tool, nothing more. He compared money to a mirror. A mirror has no value on its own. It only matters because of what it reflects. Money works the same way. Gold and silver aren't valuable because they're shiny. They're valuable because they allow people to trade, cooperate, build, and support one another. Money's power comes from movement, not possession. From that foundation came one of his most striking insights. Hoarded money is dead money. To Al-Ghazali, wealth locked away in chests, hidden in rooms, or buried in courtyards wasn't just unproductive, it was harmful. Idle wealth doesn't circulate. It doesn't pay workers. It doesn't fund trade. It doesn't support families. Instead, it chokes the economy. He described hoarding as freezing the bloodstream of society, a vivid image that still applies whenever wealth becomes concentrated and stagnant. And his critique wasn't emotional, it was systemic. When the wealthy hoard, scarcity is created artificially, not because resources are gone, but because circulation is blocked. Prices distort, markets fail, ordinary people suffer. Sound familiar? From there, Al-Ghazali turned his attention to speculation, and he had little patience for it. Merchants who manipulated prices, engineered shortages, or exploited crises for profit weren't clever in his eyes, they were corrupt. Profiting from suffering, he argued, wasn't just immoral, it was contagious. Once that mindset takes hold, it spreads through markets, institutions, and eventually the entire society. He understood something many still struggle to accept. Markets don't collapse overnight. They decay slowly as trust erodes. But Al-Ghazali wasn't anti-business. He wasn't calling for poverty or isolation. He believed deeply in trade. He believed markets were natural and necessary. Wealth, in his view, could be honorable. His problem wasn't profit, it was dishonest profit. Cheating customers, using false weights, hiding defects, manipulating information. These behaviors, he argued, poison markets from the inside. Markets only work when people trust one another. And once that trust disappears, the economy follows it right off the cliff. Another cornerstone of his thinking was labor. Al-Ghazali believed work carried dignity. Wealth earned through effort strengthened both character and society. Wealth gained through manipulation did the opposite, not just spiritually, but practically. Societies thrive when people contribute. They weaken when people extract without giving back. And his criticism didn't stop with individuals. He also took aim at rulers. In Al-Ghazali's time, many leaders debased their currency, diluting gold or silver coins to stretch government budgets. It was an early form of stealth taxation. Al-Ghazali condemned it outright. To him, debasing currency wasn't clever policy, it was theft. It punished the poor first. It undermined trust. And it destabilized the entire economic system from the top down. He believed the state had a role in protecting markets, but not manipulating them. Leaders who tampered with money for short-term gain, he warned, destroyed prosperity faster than any foreign enemy ever could. And this wasn't theory. He was watching it happen in real time. Political fragmentation, power struggles, rising taxes, reckless borrowing, asset seizures. When rulers felt their grip slipping, the economy was always the first thing they squeezed. Al-Ghazali saw the pattern clearly. Corruption at the top doesn't stay at the top. It flows downward. When rulers cheat their people, merchants feel justified cheating customers. When institutions lose integrity, individuals stop acting responsibly. The entire system becomes a chain reaction of distrust. His conclusion was blunt. A society can survive poverty, but it cannot survive corruption. And that insight is where his thinking begins to collide directly with the modern world. To Al-Ghazali, corruption wasn't just a moral failure. It was an economic death sentence. He believed civilizations don't collapse because they run out of money or resources. They collapse because trust dissolves. Trust is the invisible glue holding every transaction together. Every contract, every marketplace, every coin in circulation. Once that glue weakens, even the wealthiest society becomes fragile. That's why his views on currency were so uncompromising. For Al-Ghazali, the value of money rested entirely on honesty. When rulers diluted gold or silver coins, they weren't just adjusting policy, they were committing deception. A ruler who tampered with currency was stealing from the population slowly, quietly, and relentlessly. What looked like a small reduction in purity was, in his eyes, the beginning of financial decay. He warned that repeated manipulation of currency would eventually backfire. People would lose faith, they would stop trusting the money in their hands, and when that happened, they'd abandon it altogether, turning instead to stronger foreign currencies or alternative stores of value. At the time, this may have sounded extreme. 1,000 years later, it reads like a case study of modern history. We've seen it happen again and again. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina. Whenever people flee their own currency, it's never just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about belief. Money, Al-Ghazali understood, is ultimately a belief system. Once that belief collapses, the system follows. What makes his thinking so unsettling is how deeply he understood human behavior. People hoard money out of fear, they speculate out of greed, they cheat when they think they won't get caught, they manipulate systems because money is easier to manipulate than character. And when exploitation becomes normal, when it's rewarded, excused, or ignored, collapse is already underway. That insight led him to one of his most powerful conclusions. You cannot fix an economy without fixing incentives. Laws matter. Markets matter. Institutions matter. But beneath all of them are human beings making choices driven by fear, ambition, desire, and ego. If a society's systems reward manipulation over contribution, corruption over honesty, and extraction over service, the economy will slowly self-destruct, no matter how advanced it looks on the surface. This is why Al-Ghazali placed such emphasis on the moral dimension of wealth. Wealth itself wasn't the enemy. In his view, it was incomplete without responsibility. A healthy society is one where people contribute more than they extract, where success carries obligation, where accumulation is balanced by uplift. When wealth becomes detached from social responsibility, the system grows brittle, and brittle systems don't bend, they shatter. Civilizations rise, he believed, when balance is understood. They fall when that balance snaps. Which brings us directly into the modern world. Today's global economy moves at a speed Al-Ghazali could never have imagined, yet the underlying problems are hauntingly familiar. Money moves faster than meaning. Inequality reaches levels not seen in generations. Markets often reward speculation over contribution. Trust in institutions declines year after year. Inflation quietly erodes purchasing power. Financial bubbles inflate, burst, and inflate again with eerie predictability. Everywhere you look, there are echoes of the very patterns Al-Ghazali warned about. His critique of hoarding mirrors today's debates about extreme wealth concentration, offshore accounts, and stagnant capital. His condemnation of speculation sounds like a warning about housing bubbles, predatory lending, cryptomanias, and shadow banking. His opposition to currency manipulation sits at the heart of modern debates over inflation, monetary policy, and debt. And his insistence that trust is the foundation of prosperity explains why nations with transparent institutions, fair courts, and predictable rules tend to have stronger currencies and more resilient economies. What's striking is how little human behavior has changed. The technology is new, the markets are faster, the scale is global instead of regional. But fear, greed, ambition, and rationalization remain exactly the same. Al-Ghazali would likely look at today's runaway debt, speculative frenzies, widening inequality, political gridlock, and institutional distrust and recognize the symptoms immediately. He wouldn't be surprised. He already diagnosed the disease 1,000 years ago. Where justice is lost, prosperity cannot remain. That idea makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the myth that economics is purely technical, that if the math works, everything else will fall into place. Al-Ghazali rejected that illusion completely. Economies don't collapse because equations stop balancing. They collapse because people stop trusting one another, because incentives reward the wrong behaviors, because institutions fail to uphold fairness, because shortcuts become normal. Human emotion, not abstract models, is what pushes societies toward crisis. And that's why Al-Ghazali wasn't preaching religion. He was describing reality. He understood something many still resist acknowledging. Money is not a mechanical object. It's a moral ecosystem. And when that ecosystem breaks down, financial collapse follows as surely as night follows day. That's why his ideas matter now more than ever. In an era defined by record debt, speculative excess, institutional mistrust, and financial anxiety, his message isn't philosophical, it's practical. If money becomes detached from morality, the system will eventually fail. No amount of innovation or complexity can save it. Understanding this isn't just about learning how money works. It's about learning how societies fail. History rarely repeats itself word for word, but it does follow familiar rhythms. Ignore them, and they don't just whisper warnings. They hit hard. And more often than not, the lessons we need most aren't coming from the future. They're coming from voices we stopped listening to long ago.